Which conferences have the best chance to put in 2 of their members in the 2021 college football playoffs? Let's go. What's going on, everybody? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude, and if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. I do videos every single day. I'm trying to help you get through the work week, and the best way to support this channel and get more of my content is hit that subscribe button. Every college football season, there's a chance that each conference could put in 2 members in the college football playoffs. But who has the best chances of doing that in 2021? I'm here to rank them from last to first. Coming in at last place with their chances of getting 2 members in probably nearly at 0 would be the Pac-12. It would actually be a miracle if the Pac-12 got 1 member in. They haven't done it in a long time. I do think some teams have a chance to get in, but multiple members, I don't think so. The conference isn't strong enough, and they tend to cannibalize each other. But here are the teams that have the best chance. First up, Oregon. Oregon recruits really well, but something is going on with their quarterback situation. Tyler Shough, he was doing pretty good and had the starting job. Then he did bad, got replaced, he transferred. So their quarterback situation not looking that great. And they have a tough schedule. They start the season off against Fresno State, then at Ohio State, Stony Brook, at Colorado. The rest of their home games, Arizona, Cal, Oregon State, and Washington State. The rest of their road games, at Stanford, at UCLA, at Utah, and at Washington. I just think the schedule is not going to allow Oregon to get to the playoffs. The next team, USC. They have a lot of key players coming back, but they were too inconsistent last year. Their schedule is tough, but I don't think it's tough as Oregon's. They start off the season against San Jose State, who was really good last year. At Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame takes a step back, but that could still be a loss. BYU won't be any good, so that'll be a win. Road games at Arizona State. Yikes. At Cal, at Colorado, and at Washington State. So not a terrible road slate, but there's some challenges in there. The rest of their home slate, Arizona, Oregon State, Stanford, UCLA, and Utah. So they do get UCLA and Utah at home. That should help a little. But you gotta be more consistent to get into the playoffs. The next team that has a chance, Washington. Washington was actually a good team, but they didn't get to play in the Pac-12 championship because of COVID issues. So the best team in the North didn't even play in the championship game. They sent Oregon, and Oregon won it. That goes back to my point. They cannibalize each other. Let's look at Washington's schedule. They start off the season against Montana, at Michigan. That'll be tough. Arkansas State. The rest of their road games, at Arizona, at Colorado, at Oregon State, and at Stanford. Not a tough road slate. The rest of their home games look like this: Arizona State, Cal, Oregon, UCLA, and Washington State. So most of their tough games do come at home. So that does help Washington. In the last team, Arizona State, I think Arizona State returns the most talent, including Heisman Trophy hopeful Jayden Daniels. This dude is legit, and he was starting to catch fire towards the end of last season. Can he keep that momentum going? I don't know. But let's look at their schedule. They start off the season against Southern Utah. I think all 3 of those games are a win. Here's all their road games. At Oregon State, at UCLA, that's going to be tough, at Utah, and at Washington. Yeah, that's a tough road schedule. The rest of their home games, Arizona, Colorado, Stanford, USC, that's a good thing, and Washington State. It's just that road slate is looking a little bit difficult. I think it will be a challenge for the Pac-12 to get 1 team in the playoffs. For them to get 2 teams in, I just don't see it happening. Next to last, 4th place in the Power 5 conference's chances to get into the playoffs is the Big Ten. And the reason they're in almost last place is because Ohio State is losing a lot of players, a lot of key players. But I'm not going to say that Ohio State has 0 chance. I'll still give them a chance. They're the Buckeyes. But they do lose quarterback Justin Fields, wide receiver Chris Olave, and big-time running back Trey Sermon. That's a lot of holes to fill. Let's see how their schedule treats them. They start off the season at Minnesota. I don't think that'll be a tough game. They get Oregon at home, Tulsa, Akron, and they go to Rutgers, back home against Maryland, at Indiana, back home against Penn State, that's a big deal, at Nebraska, and then 2 home games in a row, Purdue and Michigan State, and then they finish off the season at Michigan. So the schedule, not terrible, and that road trip to Indiana is not as bad as it seems. I don't think Indiana is going to be as good as they were last year. So yes, I'm still giving Ohio State a small chance to make the playoffs. Next team, Penn State. Penn State is an enigma. Last year they had some big-time players opt out at the beginning of the season, and it did affect them. But they were a controversial 2-point conversion in overtime away from beating a good Indiana. Could that have flipped their season around and they have a much better record? I think so. And they do have quarterback Sean Clifford coming back. They'll have a good defense. It's just that offense that I'm worried about. Let's look at their schedule real quick. They start off the season at Wisconsin. That's not good. Next up, a home game against Ball State. Ball State was really good. That's not a gimme. Auburn at home. Then they get Villanova at home. Indiana at home. Got to go to Iowa. That's tough. Illinois at home. At Ohio State, at Maryland, then 2 home games against Michigan and Rutgers, and then you finish on the road at Michigan State. I don't see that schedule allowing Penn State to go to the playoffs, but I do think they will be better. The last team that I'm going to mention, in my opinion, actually has the best chance to make it to the playoffs, and that's Wisconsin. They just finished off their highest recruiting class ever in the history of the University of Wisconsin. They were great on defense. Top 10 is the offense that wasn't very good. But quarterback Graham Mertz will be back. He just needs to be more consistent. Watch out for running back Jalen Berger. This guy has big play potential. Get wide receiver Chamir Dyke back, wide receiver Kendrick Pryor back, and wide receiver Jack Dunn back. So I think the offense will take a step forward in 2021. Of course, their defense gonna be fine. Have a bunch of studs coming back. And they add 4-star TJ Ballers, 4-star linebacker Braylon Allen, and 4-star cornerback Al Ashford. So the defense is going to be fine. Let's look at their schedule real quick. They start off the season with Penn State at home. Very winnable game. Then a home game against Eastern Michigan. Then a neutral game against Notre Dame in Chicago. I think they win that game. A home game against Michigan. At Illinois. Home against Army. That could be tricky. Army had the best defense in the nation last year. At Purdue. Iowa at home, that's a big deal. At Rutgers, then they get Northwestern and Nebraska at home. And then they finish off the season at Minnesota. So I think their schedule sets up nicely. So out of those 3, I give Wisconsin the best chance to make it to the playoffs. But because Ohio State is Ohio State, I put the Big Ten ahead of the Pac-12. The 3rd place conference to get 2 teams into the playoffs in 2021 is the Big 12. And it comes down to 2 teams, Oklahoma and Iowa State. First up, Oklahoma. They did lose some people. Wide receiver Charleston Rambo, he transferred. They lost their stud running back Stevenson. Their All-American center, Creed Humphrey. That's a big deal. And defensive back Trey Norwood. But they also have a ton of talent coming back. 10 starters from that defense will be back, and it was the top 25 defense last year. Defensive coordinator Alex Grinch knows what he's doing. Of course, they get quarterback Spencer Rattler. He'll be back. They get running back Kennedy Brooks, who was a 1,000-yard rusher. He's coming back. 5-star wide receiver Jaden Hasselwood, he'll be back from an injury. Tight end Austin Stogner, he should be back. So I think Oklahoma's offense will be in really, really good shape. And they do get most of that defense back. I think Oklahoma is a playoff team. Let's look at their schedule. They start off at Tulane. Makes no sense. Whatever. It's a win. And they get Western Carolina at home. Nebraska at home. West Virginia at home. At Kansas State. That could be tricky. They get the Red River Shootout against Texas. Home against TCU. At Kansas. Then back home against Texas Tech. At Baylor. Iowa State at home. That's a big deal. And then at Oklahoma State. They own Oklahoma State. Not worried about that. So yeah, I think it sets up nicely for Oklahoma to go back to the playoffs. Now let's talk about Iowa State. They have a lot of talent coming back. This includes quarterback Brock Purdy, running back Breece Hall, tight end Dylan Somer, all-purpose player Nang Wu. He is great. He's a dangerous kick returner. And wide receiver Xavier Hutchinson. The offense is going to be loaded, but the defense will be good as well. They returned 10 starters, including their biggest playmaker, linebacker Mike Rose, defensive end Jaquan Bailey, safety Lawrence White, defensive lineman Will McDonald, and safety Greg Eisworth. I'm telling you, Iowa State could give Oklahoma a run for their money. Here's what their schedule looks like. They start off with home games against Northern Iowa and Iowa, then at UNLV, at Baylor, back home against Kansas, road trip to Kansas State, could be tricky, back home against Oklahoma State, at West Virginia, that could be tough, back home against Texas, then they end the season with 2 road games, at Texas Tech at Oklahoma. If they can go into that Oklahoma game undefeated, even if they lose that, and then come back and beat Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, and Oklahoma went undefeated during the regular season, losing a close game to Iowa State, the Big 12 could have 2 teams in the playoffs. Number 2 on the list for conferences to get 2 teams in the 2021 playoffs, I'm going to have to say the SEC. To me, it comes down to Alabama and Georgia. I think Texas A&M loses too much. I don't think Ole Miss is far enough along to challenge. Florida's going to be trash. Tennessee's going to be trash. Arkansas, up and coming, not enough. So it comes down to these 2. Now, for Alabama, they are Alabama. Best recruiting class of all time, but they did lose a lot of talent. Their quarterback, Mac Jones. Their running back, Najee Harris. Heisman Trophy winning wide receiver, Devontae Smith. Fellow wide receiver Jalen Waddle. So this might come down to their schedule. Let's look at it. They start off the season with a neutral game against Miami. A lot of people are saying this is a gimme. I don't think so. Miami returns a lot and they benefited from the transfer portal. I'm actually going to talk about them later. Next up, home against Mercer. At Florida, easy. Back home against Southern Miss. Another home game against Ole Miss. That's important. And at Texas A&M, at Mississippi State, then 4 straight home games. Wow. Tennessee, LSU, New Mexico State, and Arkansas. Then they finish the season at Auburn. I think the schedule does do Alabama a favor. So that might be their saving grace. And Alabama is Alabama. So yes, I give Alabama a pretty good chance to make the playoffs. I don't think they're going to be a national champion and probably not get to the national championship. But the schedule sets up nicely. Alabama is Alabama. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt making the playoffs. Next up, Georgia. This is the team to watch. I think they're going to have the best offense in the SEC. They returned quarterback JT Daniels, running back Zamir White, tight end Darnell Washington, wide receiver Kyrus Jackson, wide receiver Dominic Blaylock, wide receiver George Pickens, wide receiver Jermaine Burton, wide receiver Arian Smith, and 4 of their offensive linemen. And if you look at the stats last year, offense is what won teams championships and got them to the playoffs. So I think Georgia actually has the best chance to make the playoffs of the SEC. But I can't totally count Alabama out because they are Alabama. Here's Georgia's schedule. Not that difficult after Clemson. First game, Clemson, but I think they win it. Then they get UAB at home, South Carolina at home, at Vanderbilt, home against Arkansas, at Auburn, home against Kentucky, then the neutral against Florida, home against Missouri, at Tennessee, home against Charleston Southern, and then at Georgia Tech. I think they have a very, very favorable schedule after the Clemson game. That's why I have SEC as the number 2 conference to get multiple teams in the playoffs in 2021. Of course, that leaves the ACC as the number 1 conference to get multiple teams in 2021. And it's because of 3 teams. The first team, Clemson, just like Alabama, just like Ohio State, I give Clemson the benefit of the doubt. They did lose quarterback Trevor Lawrence, but we did see quarterback DJ Uiagalelei against Notre Dame, and he looked really good. They also lost running back Travis Etienne. That's the big concern for me with Clemson, their running game, and also their leading wide receiver Amari Rodgers. But Justin Ross is coming back. Defense will be Clemson's strong suit, especially at the beginning of the season. Let's look at their schedule. They start off the season against Georgia, and I actually have Clemson losing that game, but after that, I think it's smooth sailing all the way to the ACC Championship. They get South Carolina State at home, Georgia Tech at home, then they go to NC State, back home against Boston College, at Syracuse, at Pitt, back home against Florida State, at Louisville, could be tough, back home against UConn and Wake Forest, and then on the road to South Carolina. So after the Georgia game, I think Clemson finishes the season on a winning streak. We'll see what happens in the ACC Championship. The next team, Miami. Like I said before, people are saying Alabama's game against Miami is a gimme. I'm saying not so fast because they return a lot of talent and they benefited from the transfer portal. Really, the only key player that Miami lost was tight end Brevin Jordan. They get quarterback D'Eriq King back. Now, he did suffer an injury, but they're expecting him to be 100%. So we'll see how that knee looks whenever he comes back. They also get running back Cameron Harris, wide receiver Mike Harley Jr., they got wide receiver Charleston Rambo in the transfer portal from Oklahoma. Really good. On the defense, I actually think Miami will get better, and that was their weakness last year. They get defensive lineman John Ford back. They get defensive tackle Severa. He'll be back. Defensive back Bubba Bolden. He's coming back. Defensive back Al Blades Jr. He'll be back. Linebackers Zach McCloud and Jared Williams. They'll be back. And they got some good defensive players from the transfer portal. Quarterback Tyreek Stevenson from Georgia and defensive end DeAndre Johnson from Tennessee. Miami's going to be loaded next year. It's the schedule that's going to be interesting. They start off the season neutral against Alabama. We all know that's going to be a tough one. Then they get Appalachian State at home, Michigan State at home, Central Connecticut at home, and then Virginia at home. In their first true road game, of course, on the road to North Carolina, the toughest road game of the year. Then back home against NC State, at Pitt, back home to Georgia Tech, at Florida State, back home to Virginia Tech, and then finish the season at Duke. So it's the schedule that could be a little tricky. Mainly neutral game against Alabama and then at North Carolina. If somehow they can beat Alabama, then that road game to North Carolina looks a whole lot easier. Last team I want to look at in the ACC is North Carolina. They could end up being the best team in the ACC. Really, their only loss was at running back. They lost Michael Carter and Javonte Williams. Yes, those are big shoes to fill, but they have a lot of five-star running backs coming back. Quarterback Sam Howell, he will be a Heisman Trophy contender. Most of that defense will be back. North Carolina is going to be a very, very, very dangerous team in 2021. Let's look at their schedule real quick. They start off the season at Virginia Tech. Maybe 5-10 years ago, that'd be a tough road game. Not this year. Easy win. They come back home, play Georgia State, and then Virginia, then at Georgia Tech. Then they get 3 home games. Duke, Florida State, and Miami. That's a big deal. Then on the road at Notre Dame, I think that's a winnable game. Notre Dame's not going to be as good. Back home to face Wake Forest, then at Pitt, home against Wofford, and then at NC State. So yes, I think the ACC, even without Notre Dame, forget Notre Dame, I think the ACC has the best chance to get multiple teams in because of Clemson, North Carolina, and Miami. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.